I'm Susan Yawkey with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, a massive suicide bomb attack on a Shi'ite shrine in central Kabul. The UN condemns the civilian toll in Yemen fighting. The UN Security Council approves new Eritrea sanctions.
This resolution underscores the international community's condemnation of Eritrea's destabilizing behavior in the Horn and its support for terrorism.
And the UN is building green schools in Gaza. It's all ahead on VOA. On the holiest day of the Shiite Muslim calendar, 2 terrorist bomb attacks in Afghanistan, apparently targeting Shiite worshippers, have killed at least 52 people. The attacks come less than 24 hours after the conclusion of a major international conference in Germany on ways to stabilize Afghanistan. VOA South Asia correspondent Kurt Achen has details.
Ambulances rushed to the scene of the bombing in central Kabul Tuesday, where a suicide bomb created a scene of carnage outside a Shiite shrine. Women and children are among the dead. More than 100 were wounded by the blast, taking place on Ashura, the holiest day of the Shiite religious calendar. A second explosion targeted a shrine in the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif, killing 4 people. This woman in Kabul holds the blood-stained shoe of her murdered son in his early 20s and cries out, "I only had one son." General Mohammed Ayub Salangi is the Kabul police chief. He says one religious ceremony was about to finish and a new group of worshippers was arriving. The suicide attack took place in the midst of the new group, he explains. Afghan President Hamid Karzai, still in Germany following Monday's international conference on Afghanistan, condemned the attacks.
Which is the first time that on such an important religious day in Afghanistan, terrorism of that horrible nature is taking place. We all wish the best for those who are injured and quick recovery, and patience to the families of those who have lost their dear ones.
A day earlier, Karzai was in Bonn, urging representatives of more than 100 nations to commit resources to Afghanistan's peace process. General John Allen is the commander of the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. He calls the attack the latest example of insurgents' blatant disregard for human life. This killing of Afghans by Afghans, he says in a statement, must come to an end. The Taliban released a statement on Tuesday saying it did not plan the attacks, calling them cruel and indiscriminate and blaming them on the invading enemy. Still, Candace Rondeau, security analyst for the International Crisis Group, says the attacks may set a worrying precedent.
I think it sends a message that certainly the Taliban and or other insurgent groups may be turning more toward a sectarian approach to its strategy, targeting very specific groups, and that's extremely troubling.
Experts say the main attack, which took place in a relatively secure sector of Kabul, underscores the importance of what was agreed in Bonn, that all countries in the region need cooperate in securing long-term stability for Afghanistan. Kurt Achen, VOA News, Islamabad.
Afghanistan faces a daunting future when international forces begin leaving. VOA's Ira Millman spoke with Matt Irvin, research associate at the Washington-based Center for New American Security, and co-author of a study called Beyond Afghanistan, a Regional Security Strategy for South and Central Asia. They spoke about what will happen when and if international forces leave Afghanistan in large numbers.
If the United States military especially, but also international forces withdraw from Afghanistan, there's a huge security vacuum of more than 100,000 soldiers who are leaving the field, and also, which comes with them, hundreds of billions of foreign dollars. So Afghanistan is going to have to figure out a way to redefine security without foreign forces and with substantially fewer dollars to support development projects as well as their own security.
Is that doable?
I think it is doable, but you'd have to change the way that you actually approach the security situation in Afghanistan. You cannot expect foreign forces or forces at the level of NATO or the United States to be operating in Afghanistan for 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. What you have to plan for is for the Afghan forces to be able to reshape the fight in their own image and thus be able to impose an Afghan solution to the conflict within the country, and then also seek a political solution throughout the region.
Pakistan refused to take part for reasons that have already been delineated, but they have refused to take part in this conference. How important is their participation, not necessarily in the conference, but in the overall operation of a transition?
Pakistan is a critical component to the overall resolution to the conflict in Afghanistan as well as to the future of Afghanistan. Pakistan is a huge partner or potential threat to stability in Afghanistan as well as to economic development and progress in the country. Afghanistan has been ravaged by war for more than 30 years, and the majority of its trade goes in and out of Pakistan, as well as the majority of arms going to its insurgents go in and out of Pakistan. So the levers that Pakistan controls are critical to both the success or the failure of Afghanistan as a government as well as its security.
Do you see the current situation between the United States and Pakistan as something any more than a blip on the radar of history?
I think the current situation between the United States and Pakistan is part of a long-term trend that you've seen over the last 2 years of a deteriorating relationship. The bin Laden raid in May was not the single contributing factor to the downward spiral in U.S.-Pakistani relations, but rather a significant setback to an already declining relationship. The most recent attack, the November killing of 24 Pakistani soldiers by the United States, was yet another blow to that, and it appears that the relations will continue to downgrade as we look into the next year.
You have been part of a study dealing with a regional security strategy for South and Central Asia. What can be done about all of this? What are some steps that you think and you have found might be done and might be carried out to better this situation?
I think one key step is for the United States as well as NATO allies to realize that they themselves are not going to defeat the Taliban on the battlefield. The Afghan security forces must be given control of the war and be supported in their efforts to establish security inside their own country. But also we have to remain open to and seek out political solutions to this conflict in every way that we possibly can find. That includes negotiating with the Taliban. That includes engaging with the Pakistani government on an equal level between the United States and Pakistan, and supporting Afghanistan as a sovereign country post-2014, which is the very thesis of the Bonn conference going on now.
Do you see any realistic positive end to this? If so, what is it? What would it look like? Or do you see this as just another chapter in the ever-growing book of Great Game Afghanistan?
I do see a resolution, and I believe that the resolution will likely be an empowered Afghan security forces capable of defending the central government in Kabul. However, that does not mean that the Taliban will be completely defeated, and that does not mean that the Taliban will be part of a political settlement. However, components of the Taliban will likely reach some sort of an agreement with either the government of Pakistan or the government of Afghanistan in order to resolve the conflict at a level of violence or a level of stability that is acceptable to both parties. That is not going to be a perfect end state, and it will likely not be a perfect democracy or republic, but it will be agreeable to both sides.
Matt Irvin, research associate at the Washington-based Center for a New American Security, speaking with VOA's Ira Melman. Bombs ripped through crowds at Shiites in Iraq Monday, killing at least 28 people during a religious observance. The explosions were the latest reminder that violence is still a daily threat in Iraq. VOA's Sharon Bain has details from Baghdad.
Security remains tenuous in Iraq. Despite increased police presence, a series of deadly bombs killed dozens of Shiite followers. The pilgrims were celebrating the annual Ashura ceremonies that mark the anniversary of the 7th century death of Imam Hussein, a grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. From a distance, Baghdad looks like a normal, crowded city. But for those living here, like Heba Hisham, violence and death are a daily reality.
I told you, when you see people dying, someone would say, I know how it feels now. No, people are out there living in Egypt or living wherever or living abroad. They say we know how it feels. No, nobody knows how it feels until they come and they live here and they really see what Iraqis are going through. And it's terrible.
In a few weeks, the U.S. military will complete its withdrawal from Iraq. Some Iraqis question the results of the 8 years the American military spent here. Judge Abdul Razak Mahmoud Ismail is working on compensating victims of the violence since the U.S. invasion in 2003. He says the military mistakes and terrorist attacks have left behind a lot of damages and many victims. What is not clear is that if the violence of the last 8 years will end when the American troops finally leave, or, as some fear, the violence will get even worse. Sharon Bain, VOA News, Baghdad.
Are you looking for a comprehensive look at dynamic events reshaping the Middle East? Subscribe to the audio podcast of our signature radio program, Middle East Monitor. Download it and listen to new episodes Monday through Friday on your smartphone or computer. To get it, simply launch iTunes and search for Middle East Monitor. Or search VOA and podcast on Google to find VOA's podcast page and subscribe to Middle East Monitor by RSS.
The U.S. ambassador to Syria will return to the country today after he left his post more than a month ago due to security concerns. U.S. State Department officials say Ambassador Robert Ford has completed his consultations in Washington and will return to Damascus. Ford was called back to Washington in late October after he received death threats for meeting with Syrian opposition leaders and showing support for protesters. U.S. officials say Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is meeting with 7 exiled Syrian dissidents in Geneva today in a gesture of support for the opposition movement. The United States has been trying to isolate the government of Syria's President Bashar al-Assad in response to its crackdown on political dissent that has killed more than 4,000 people since March. Meanwhile, American broadcaster ABC News has announced that longtime anchor woman Barbara Walters has secured an exclusive interview with Bashar al-Assad. The interview will be made available online Wednesday, December 7th at abcnews.com and Yahoo News. It can also be seen on Nightline, a prominent American nightly news program. UN agencies are voicing concern about the suffering of civilians during battles between Yemen's army and tribal fighters in the southern city of Taiz. The United Nations says more than 20 people have been killed and 80 injured since December 1st. Lisa Schlein reports from the UN European headquarters in Geneva.
Clashes between the Yemeni army and tribal fighters in Taiz are continuing despite a ceasefire agreement reached on December 4th. A spokeswoman for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Elizabeth Beers, says heavy shelling and street fighting have damaged civilian neighborhoods and forced many residents of Taiz to flee their homes.
L'accès aux services sociaux de base est de plus en plus limité. Les écoles, les hôpitaux.
Beers says access to basic social services is increasingly limited. She says schools and hospitals are occupied or are coming under attack by armed forces and armed groups. She says this directly affects more than 100,000 children who now have limited or no access to school or health facilities. The UN Children's Fund reports children are paying a heavy price in this warfare. UNICEF spokeswoman Marixie Mercado says 3 children have been killed and 7 wounded in the latest violence in Taiz.
That brings the total number of children killed so far to 138. The majority through live ammunition. This includes bullets, shelling, missile attacks. 89 of them, I said, were killed with live ammunition. Many of the 568 children injured also by live ammunition. Our youngest victim thus far was 3 months old, killed in Taiz on the 1st of December. And we, with all our partner agencies, urge all the parties to spare civilians, particularly women and children.
The UN agencies are demanding an immediate stop to the killings and urging all sides to halt the use of violent force. Taiz is one of the largest cities in Yemen and is about 200 kilometers south of the capital, Sana'a. It has been the scene of sporadic but intense clashes during the past 10 months between government soldiers and tribal groups who oppose the 33-year rule of President Ali Abdullah Saleh. The violence in Taiz and other areas has continued, despite an agreement signed by Mr. Saleh last month to step down and transfer power to his vice president. Lisa Schlein for VOA News, Geneva.
You're tuned to Middle East Monitor, broadcasting to you from Washington. Stay tuned at the bottom of the hour Universal Time for World News on International Edition. The UN Security Council has approved tougher sanctions on Eritrea for its destabilizing behavior in the Horn of Africa. From the United Nations, VOA's Margaret Bashir reports the adoption of the new sanctions came after a direct appeal from several East African leaders.
Monday's action tightens and in some cases expands existing sanctions on Eritrea. The Council voted on the measures because of members' concerns over Eritrea's provision of political, financial, training and logistical support of armed opposition groups, including al-Shabaab. Under the new resolution, the UN's most powerful body demands that Eritrea end such assistance. The resolution, sponsored by Nigeria and Gabon, received 13 votes in favor, while veto-wielding members Russia and China abstained. U.S. Ambassador Susan Rice welcomed the adoption of the resolution, telling reporters after the vote that it builds on Sanctions Resolution 1907, which was passed 2 years ago.
This resolution underscores the international community's condemnation of Eritrea's destabilizing behavior in the Horn and its support for terrorism. It strengthens the provisions of 1907 and imposes additional obligations on Eritrea, limits its ability to continue to use the mining sector and the diaspora tax to fund its illicit activities.
Although there are no new economic sanctions in Resolution 2023, German Ambassador Peter Wittig said it demands more transparency from Eritrea and calls on those doing business with the country to ensure that funds are not used for illegitimate purposes.
Resolution 2023 sends a clear political message to Eritrea. It must stop all activity that destabilizes the region, and it must cooperate with its neighbors.
China abstained from supporting sanctions against Eritrea 2 years ago and did so again Monday. Ambassador Li Baodong said Beijing prefers dialogue and negotiations when settling disputes. He's heard here through a translator.
China has all along adopted a prudent attitude towards sanctions, believing as we do that sanctions, instead of achieving expected results, may often lead to further complication of the situation and affect the economic development and people's livelihood in the country in question.
Earlier Monday, 5 of Eritrea's neighbors appealed to the Security Council via video link from Addis Ababa. They told the 15-member council that it must act decisively to stop the Asmara government from further destabilizing the region. They also expressed regret that the council had weakened the resolution based on certain members' objections. Eritrea's president, Isaias Afwerki, originally had insisted on speaking to the Security Council, but he did not come to New York as some diplomats had expected, nor did he speak by video link or send his UN ambassador to address the meeting. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
The United Nations Relief Agency in the Gaza Strip is planning to build 20 green schools in the Palestinian territory. The head architect on the project says the self-sufficient buildings will be environmentally sustainable while providing dignity for refugee students. Gabe Joselo has more from Durban, South Africa, where the project's organizers outlined their plans.
The Palestinian territories are often left out of the discussion on climate change. According to the International Energy Agency, the territories rank 137th on the list of the world's carbon dioxide emitters, polluting slightly less than Iceland and slightly more than Madagascar. But after years of conflict, the area has significant development needs. Robert Strike is the program support coordinator for the United Nations agency working in the Gaza Strip, UNRWA.
We have about 240 schools. These 240 schools, they provide education for about 230,000 children, and we have about 40,000 children which are on waiting lists because basically we can't care for them.
To tackle the problem, UNRWA is building green schools using low-cost, environmentally sustainable technology that happens to pollute less and conserve more. The buildings can provide for 800 students each and cost about $2 million. The plan is to build 20 schools in the coming years. The architect behind the project, Mario Cuccinella, says the difficult living conditions in Gaza make it an ideal testing ground for sustainable projects.
And I think the challenge in Gaza, which is one of the most extreme areas in the world, it's very difficult. It's like a window on the future disaster. Now, everybody talk about what would be the future. Too many people, an explosional demographic problem, difficult to access to natural resource, difficult to get energy, difficult to get water. So everything is already in Gaza.
In a place where 90% of the available drinking water is not safe to drink, the schools catch rainwater that is purified through a system of sand and planted tree roots. Where summer temperatures reach 40 degrees Celsius, the buildings will sit on what Cuccinella calls an air lake, which is a bed of gravel that allows the cooler air from the ground to circulate. And the classrooms will be built with high ceilings that let the hot air move up and away. The broad columns that support the structure are filled with excavated earth, another low-tech device for controlling temperatures. Cuccinella says the design combines new technology with basic construction elements that have long been used in the Middle East.
I like to think the school we design is, in one way, is look the past as a reference, so how people was able to dealing with climate condition for centuries without any electricity, and look the future because we're able to use some really high-tech specific technology to run the building better than before.
Cuccinella says the project is also about bringing dignity to refugee students in the Gaza Strip. UNRWA says the first school will be completed in the next 12 months, but that more financing and technical expertise are needed to complete the full project. The green building plans are part of UNRWA's broader reconstruction projects to help rebuild following the Israeli ground offensive in Gaza that killed some 1,400 Palestinians nearly 4 years ago. Gabe Joselo, VOA News, Durban.
And up next is our weekly poll feature. Joining me is our Middle East online editor, Yuri Hiltaichuk, to sum up our last topic and share the results. What do you have for us today, Yuri?
Hi, Susan. Last week our focus was on the sanctions the Arab League imposed on Syria for its failure to follow through on a peace plan the League had laid out to curb the bloodletting in that country. So the question we put forth was whether the sanctions that include a freeze on trade and investment would force President Bashar al-Assad to change course in his crackdown on dissent. Now, according to our poll results, a majority of voters, more than 69%, believe that the sanctions will not have their intended effect. More than 18% of voters believe that they will, and 12% were undecided. And these numbers are based on more than 700 votes that we received, and as always, I need to stress that this poll is not scientific.
So, what are we going to be asking this coming week?
Well, Egypt has just released the preliminary results from its first post-Mubarak-era parliamentary elections. Now, the voting in that poll is a long and drawn-out process and far from completed, but already the numbers are showing that Islamic parties are taking the lead and likely will hold a fairly strong majority in the country's next parliament. So the question on the minds of many is what role Sharia law will play in the country's yet-to-be rewritten constitution, and whether Sharia will become the basis for that document. And that's also the question we'd like to ask in our new poll. And anybody can weigh in by casting their vote on our site, voanews.com/me. Again, that's voanews.com/me, and we'll meet here again in a week with the results.
Well, thank you, Yuri.
My pleasure, Susan.
That's VOA Middle East online editor, Yuri Hiltaichuk, here in our Washington studios. This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. Join us Monday through Friday for news from the region and of interest to the region. Coming up on International Edition, a look at the latest European Union economic crisis recovery plans. Thanks for tuning in to the Voice of America.
For more on the stories you've heard on our radio programs, visit our website at voanews.com. That's where you'll find in-depth reports, related stories, videos, and more from our team of correspondents. Or take the news with you by downloading podcasts of your favorite VOA program. That's at voanews.com. Online news for a changing world.